2020. But
We are recording and we're live on Facebook, so you ladies can get started whenever you'd like.
excellent.
Awesome.
Happy Friday, Maddie. Welcome to Engagement That Scales. It's great to have you because it's been a while since we've caught up.
Yes, I know. We definitely need to catch up.
And since we've caught up, I think you've written a book, rebranded,
So
got combined with another organization. So, like, tell me what's going on before we get started, because
yeah, so a lot has been happening. So in April or May, we basically we were approached by Amit Nagajaran, who's a colleague in the association industry, and he's somebody who has owned and sold several companies. And we've worked with him before, I knew him. And he said, I'm interested in your business. And we're like, really? Because we're consultants, like we're not the kind of, we're not software, like we don't have a product you can just buy. So it was very intriguing. And so as it turns out, he's building a family of companies that help purpose-driven organizations to have greater growth and impact. So the conglomerate, I guess, is called Blue Cypress, and we are now part of it because this is very exciting, and we wanted, of course, to be in with that. But we're with several other companies, and we all work with associations and nonprofits and any purpose-driven organization that really wants to grow and scale and specifically to grow their impact in whatever they do. So obviously that's different things for different kinds of companies and organizations, but growth is the big sort of message that we're pushing, and so as part of that, we rebranded from Human Workplaces to Propel, because Propel helps push you toward basically better culture and strategy and execution. So those are the three pillars of our new stuff. And really what we're doing is reimagining strategic planning for the association industry specifically, alongside our regular culture consulting, deeper dive culture assessments and things like that. So strategic planning is something that's been done the same way for a very, 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 very long time. And now the world is different. And of course, in 2020, we know even better how different the world can be and how fast things can just be completely upended. So there's lots of ways to think differently about how you plan, how you plan to evolve.
Tell me about that, because we also we do it under the guise of community strategy, but that can also be organizational strategy depending on
as it should be for sure.
And we have a pretty different approach to strategic planning too, so I'd love to hear kind of not the specifics, but what do you think needs to change? What are the big things that need to change about it?
Yeah, so it's actually pretty simple, and you'll recognize everything I'm about to say, but it's basically a much shorter time frame. So forget the 3 to 5 year cycle, but take your big lofty vision and chunk it down into 1 year, quarterly. What is the thing I need to do today that moves the needle towards my overall organizational goal? And then spreading that out through the whole organization. So every individual has a part to play in achieving the strategic goals, right? But normally people don't think about that ever, or they don't know what their part is, or they're just not connected to it. Strategic planning is something that's done by the C-suite far away, and so
I have
connecting it
right now to a nonprofit that has been going through months and months of strategic planning. But nothing seems to ever actually
Nothing trickles down.
or
Nothing
happens.
trickles down or
Like,
happens.
it's
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And then the third big piece is, of course, we're culture consultants. And we have now worked with hundreds of different organizations, and we know that culture is often the big missing piece to getting things done. So it can, if there's no attention paid to culture, it gets in the way, through lack of communication and just lack of engagement, and all of these things that we've talked about a million times. But now we can start to prove that having a good attention to culture can directly affect your bottom line or your impact or your ability to serve your members if you're an association, or any of these things. So it's actually like super exciting work. So
I'm also curious. Uh, Culture change is such an onion, right?
mhm.
Like, how do you when you go in somewhere, how do you peel that onion? Does it does it depend on what's going on? I
No.
imagine no.
Well, yes and no. So we have multiple different ways of peeling that onion. Our previous work was focused around our culture assessment, which drills into how people experience the workplace today. So it's not about an ideal culture.
Mhm.
It's like, here's how we do, here's how we do transparency, or here's how we do collaboration, or here's how we do innovation right now. And all of it's written up in a positive way. So this could be exactly what you need to be doing, or it could be that there are places you can change. So that's one way to look at it, and that requires, any culture assessment requires a whole organization to take the assessment, right, or a big percentage of it. So it's a system-wide kind of look. But through our aggregate data, after several years of looking at this stuff, we've now identified a bunch of culture patterns, which are really interesting and which seem to be applicable to many, many, many organizations. And then, we can have the conversation about, exactly in which ways are you like this or different from this. But one example would be for innovation. So there's a pattern where we love to talk about innovation. We love to be purpose driven. We're creative. We're interested in the concepts of innovation, but we actually have no internal processes for experimentation, right? There's no like systems for being able to try things, so it's like we talk the talk, but we don't walk the walk. That's one.
It's funny to me because at some point uh, we work with a lot of like governance structure. So at some point I was looking at budgets and I'm like, we need a line for patience, right? Like we just need a bucket of undefined time that we don't know how we're going to use it, but we'll figure it
Right.
out.
Right.
And we
Right.
don't have that.
Exactly. Yeah, and in the corporate world, I mean, Google's 20% time, and like there are some good examples, but in the nonprofit and association sectors, there's a lot less of that, except where it comes to doing more with less resources. It's where there's obviously some creativity that's happened there over the years. But yeah, it's just very granular, and people don't think of culture as being a granular thing. But as soon as you start to pay attention to that stuff, like immediately you come up with tons of ideas of little tweaks that you can make that will just, the doors will open.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to how we think about engagement as well, which is uh, when we think about culture, we look at the fractal, right? Like the minimum pattern that kind of builds to create that, and it's the individual behavior. Like, how often do people ask questions. And then you get into the power dynamics very quickly, because who's allowed to ask questions is usually the question, not how many questions. So, and that's not something we often directly address, but it's something that's on my mind a lot, because you get into very, very deep-seated mindsets around what should and shouldn't be. Yeah, so that's interesting to me.
You think has that changed at all in this year with the pandemic and everything?
I think, well, one of the opportunities that I think is interesting is the pandemic has shown, like, exploded so much that I don't know where all the chips are going to fall, right? Yeah. And with change, it's this inflection point, right? Like, and if you're just getting small inflection points, you can go back to the way things were pretty quickly if they're not invested in.
Yeah.
If it's an inflection point at a big enough impact level, then it flips the whole system. So that's where I'm like, I don't know. Like,
yeah, maybe in the next few months, you'll start to see those chips falling.
I think one thing it has shown to me is it's exposed or revealed a little more about who can change and who can't change. Meaning, who are the people who really go back to their comfort zone and sort of reject what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, so for us, it's actually interesting because we're very focused on what we're calling a return to the workplace, but it's not literally, because we know that workplaces will never be the same, but some things, once obviously the vaccine is out there and, things can sort of go back to normal. We want to pay attention to just like you're saying, but from a systems perspective, like what goes back to normal and what never goes back to how it was. And definitely the ability to collaborate remotely, of course, even if some people are back in the office, it's never going to be the way. Like you don't have to make the argument anymore that people can work from home, because people have been doing it.
The real insight that I'm seeing that is encouraging is I just started an engagement for the CIO of a very large company who is basically saying we're never going back and we're going to have a hybrid work environment. And what I'm hearing from that is, we finally realized that the platform called the office, that we have as the headquarters office, even though we're international, is the container of our culture. And implicitly, we just allowed that to kind of happen. And we should actually be more explicit about this. And what is the office good for? And what are what's the infrastructure we need to have across the entire employee population that really is the centralized point of engagement for everybody, that I don't want to say holds the culture, because that's never what infrastructure does.
Yeah.
But is the primary support of connecting across the entire company. So that's a level of mindset shift that I don't, and a level of prioritization that I didn't see prior.
Yeah. Yeah, for us, what we've seen is if you had some culture issues before, they're way exacerbated now. If you had conflicts or, departments that didn't talk to each other, like anything like that, lack of information and people getting frustrated by it, all of that's been exponentially exposed.
The risk that I see, though, is in companies that have done, or organizations that have done lift and shift, meaning we're just going to have a zillion meetings on Zoom all day. Their employees are actually working more hours and harder. And so the perception for them of virtual or digital work is that it's worse than working in the office. And of course, my perspective, working on the other side of that, is like, you're doing it all wrong. But I worry about that because there is a portion of people that will have a backlash to the virtual.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And it's interesting because there's such a sort of experimentation, basically, in terms of, at first it's like all of our existing meetings just were made virtual because we're thrust into this position. But then it's like, okay, well, we need to keep people more connected, so we should add some meetings, add some daily huddles that we didn't used to do. And then, you start to think, okay, Zoom fatigue, this is way too much. People are just, they can't deal with it. So you pull back. So just watching all of this unfold, is really fascinating.
It's actually interesting because I'm on a couple of volunteer committees, board for nonprofits. And I tend to have more meetings with them than I do for work, even though I'm doing less work for them. And my attempts to try and get them to work out loud online asynchronously are
culture change,
not fabulous. And it's fascinating. The latest iteration of that is like, oh, our CMS has comments. And I'm like, I don't know that, that's not a conversational tool, right? Yes, I can add comments, but it's clunky. And so there's not a lot of bringing together of technical comfort and social comfort.
Well, that's the whole other fascinating thing is obviously companies that do virtual conferencing have exploded, and there's just so much experimentation in that space, and I think there's new technologies we don't even really know about yet, more on the corporate side or on the internal intranet side, that will start to try and address some of these things.
It's actually interesting because that's been one of my biggest complaints about community platform vendors, is they've never done any kind of templatizing or structure to engagement patterns. They kind of they have a discussion board, but they don't add on, okay, how can you use it to do an AMA? How can you do this? How can you do that? There's all these different kinds of events that you can hold in a community, but right now it's dependent on either the community manager, if they have one, being creative enough to figure that out, and or integration to something else that does that. And it's a huge opportunity. And actually, when we measured our audience for different levels of satisfaction across different dimensions of platforms, that was one of the biggest opportunity spaces there, even before this pandemic hit.
Yeah, we've seen that a lot too. And just the ability of platforms to measure engagement in different ways. Not everybody, I'm working with a client now who has scientists as their community members, and they're very active, but they don't discuss anything. It's not conversation, but they're creating articles, they're discussing, I mean, they're commenting on each other's articles, they're doing all kinds of videos and infographics. I mean, they're just very content heavy, but that it, like in the back end, it doesn't count. You know, because they're not, I mean, a few of them are creating the posts, but a lot of the posts are put up by staff. So
it's also interesting because not all vendors, but some vendors have gone towards the like engagement index thing where I'm going to give you one number that's going to, and it's the same across all people, all companies in my platform. And like, we're going to figure out what good engagement means. And I'm like, because it's different. It's even different among one organization if you've got two different communities. Like
exactly,
they serve different purposes, and so you need a whole different level. And the other thing that's always fascinated me, and I think is kind of the next generation of potential in communities too, is very few, like kind of like the comment you had, which is everybody talks about innovation, but people actually don't mind the communities create meaningful reports out of them. Yeah. And so I said to somebody recently, we do the state of community management every year.
Yeah.
And I was like, all of our customers should have the state of X community. Like,
yes.
And it should be qualitative and it should be quantitative, and it should contextualize what you're learning from the community. But that's not funded, right? Like, you need funding for that, right? And if you've got one community manager, like,
right,
that's just too much. But and that would be, I mean, and we've seen it at the CR because we're doing that annually. The ability for us to innovate over the last decade has been huge. And it's because
I've loved watching this
conversation to research, conversation to research. Like it's this cycle, there's not an end to it. And it always surprises me that people don't see that potential or that use, or I don't know. I'm like, it's the biggest value you have in your community, and you're not actually taking advantage of it. We started to see that change a little bit. But.
Yeah, I think part of the issue might be that when these things are discussed, it's like the potential, it's when you're launching a community, but then it takes so long to get to the point where you actually have data that you've forgotten all about the big ideas that you might have had, when you were launching.
Yeah, and the dynamic is still not it's not a obvious or intuitive one to most executives because it's not a cause and effect. It's an indirect thing, and it's a compounding thing. Like, you socially norm new behaviors, which is behavior changes how you generate impact or economic value, or like whatever you're trying.
Well, and I think the platforms don't necessarily provide the right amount of data either. So there's
not structured in the way.
Yeah, not exactly. There's too much analysis that would have to be done externally by somebody, and
it's like kind of the same. You're relying on a very small number of community managers to do all these things, and they can't be experts in all these things and be a community manager. Like, you just can't do all of that stuff. What was interesting this year, I probably could have done it other years. I didn't think to do it, but I had enough data to look at cost per member per year of communities. And what was really interesting is you saw the flip side of the compounding curve, which is it was a fairly high cost in the first year, and that cost actually went up in year 2 and year 3, even though membership was also going up. And it's because you're investing in all the infrastructure to support that normed behavior, and you're changing governance, and you're changing management, you're changing how you think about content, and you're changing metrics. And so there's a lot of investment to that process change. And then it drops to the floor, right? So the first stage is we're experimenting, we're trying to figure it out, then we're investing to make sure that's scalable, and then we're getting the benefit. So you're looking at, and communities have ROI before that, but you're not getting the exponential ROI until year 3 or 4.
Yeah.
It's really tough for organizations.
Yeah.
To grasp investing and all of that stuff.
Yeah, managing expectations there, because people still don't know that it takes a long time just to get it up and running. Just does not happen overnight.
The whole business management world is really oriented towards very direct, very short-term returns, to the detriment of value creation, honestly. And I'm not 100% sure how we necessarily change that for the majority of organizations, because like it rolls up to the stock market, right? And
yeah, no, of course.
Stock market kind of pervades thinking all the way down.
But that's why if they could actually use their communities for, trend research and stuff that could be much shorter term, because trends don't last a long necessarily either, right? But that's partly, better data and better tech, and then partly just the right attention and asking the right questions and using your communities as focus groups, but on a really regular basis.
Yeah.
And in a way that drives a specific,
on a very integrated,
right.
circuitous basis. It's not like that ever stops. Like, it should be part of that process, and it's not. That's still very divided in organizations right now.
Are you seeing any exploration into machine learning or AI when it comes to community data? How's happening?
The interesting challenge there is, unless you have a lot of community engagement, AI doesn't work very well.
Yeah, there's not enough data. Yeah,
not enough data. So then it produces a very limited support. But if you have years of data, you can really cut down on duplication of content, and you can connect all the, like, if you use AI on social networks, you can really surface the people that others should know. So it is a great complement to community management in that respect. It takes off a lot of the administrative, very detail-oriented but repetitive work.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I've been a little out of the loop on that side of things for a while.
Well, and honestly, I think a lot of people have put the cart before the horse, right? Like, they don't have well-functioning communities, but they're interested in AI. And you're like, well, first, you should figure out how your community needs to work to support the business objective. And then you can invest in this infrastructure, right? Like, then your investment pays off. But if you invest in AI before you kind of know how to get that engagement and that change, you're slamming into a brick wall faster.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's not really well understood.
I think cart before the horse is pretty much a systemic problem everywhere, and it's partly even, building a big platform before building a little one to just see if you've got the people who are willing to interact in that way. Or
yeah, and so there's some organizations who have the leadership to really be able to have that patience. And there's a lot more that just, things are okay, even though everybody's stressed, that they haven't felt the pain enough to really change.
Yeah.
And it's hard to really address that in project work from the outside, right? Like people have to be motivated to do it. So well, Maddie, it's been great to catch up with you, and it sounds like you're doing some fascinating work. Before I let you go, I thought it would be really cool to understand what books are on your stack.
So I have a book called They Ask You Answer, which is a marketing, it's all about marketing, which of course is my focus right now. And I wish my stack was here so I could remember. But I've bought a lot of books related to equity and diversity. There's one I'm very excited to read that's about, it's called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man.
Oh, yeah. That just came out, right?
Yes, it sounds.
Those videos are, and I'm gonna butcher his name if I say it, so I'm not gonna say it. But I've been listening to his videos, and they're excellent.
Oh, good. Yeah. So I'm not even that. I've seen one or two, but I'm very excited to read this book. So those are the two that are on the next in the list, basically.
My list includes Caste. I don't know if you've read that.
No.
Caste by Isabella Wilkerson. It's about the power levels in American society that are unspoken. Unbound by Heather Boucher, who that's her last name, but she is an economist that worked for Hillary Clinton and has done a lot about like how more equitable economies are actually more valuable. Together by Vivek Murthy, who's the incoming and the past Surgeon General, but he's talking a lot about the mental, physical health, like integrate that and what do you really need. And there's not, I'm really into the power thing now. So there's another one called The Purpose of Power that's on my list too. So those are the ones I'm digging into over vacation.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get some reading done over the holidays. We're officially closed for the week between Christmas and New Year's because we've been working so hard on this launch. I was like, if we don't take some time now before things really kick off, like we need it. So I have a huge pile of fiction books I just put in my Amazon. I haven't bought them yet, but I think I have like 20 books in there that I'm about to purchase.
And actually, I'll also recommend one that I read last week called Braiding Sweetgrass. It's by a Native American botanist.
Oh.
And it's very lyrical, and it's kind of like a combination of essays, so you don't necessarily have to read the whole, like you can kind of read a chapter, but she kind of weaves social stuff with personal history, with botany, and the understanding the relationship between things in the world. It's a very lovely book to read, as well as like just giving you some different perspective around how do you think about our role and interaction with the rest of the world. That's what I would recommend as well. Maddie, it was great to have you. Have a fabulous rest of 2020, or maybe I should say have a fabulous 2021, and let's just shut the door.
Yes. Like 13 days ago or something.
Get that leaf off the page, out of the notebook, and we'll catch up again in the new year.
Yeah, definitely. It was great talking to you.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.